The news that the government has decided on a further pause before proceeding with the committee stage of the EU withdrawal bill is a welcome acknowledgement of the difficulties associated with this legislation. Over the past few weeks, hundreds of potential amendments have been tabled to the bill by MPs on all sides of the House. From my reading of them, the vast majority raise issues of importance as to how the legislation will work in practice, which the government must try to address, if only to persuade those who tabled them that their concerns are unfounded. The risk, however, must be that with so much to debate and a limited time to do it in, we will lose sight of the wood for the trees. Both MPs and ministers are going to have to focus on the key issues if the necessary changes are to be made to improve the bill. The first and foremost matter is the need for the government to accept that the unprecedented powers it is seeking to take to carry the bill into effect are excessive. Henry VIII clauses allowing the government to change almost any law of the land by statutory instrument, if needed, to implement Brexit must be properly restricted. Most importantly, Parliament must insist on the creation of a bespoke process of scrutiny for such statutory instruments. The current procedures of the House of Commons are not up to dealing with legislation of this magnitude. Parliament must be able to control the process of how the estimated 1,000 statutory instruments are scrutinized and approved. Hillary Clinton talks about Brexit being a big lie. There are a number of amendments tabled that could help do this, including one of my own. The signs are that the government is responding positively to this and may come up with proposals of its own. It ought to be possible to achieve a sensible consensus on this. Without it, the bill is not fit to be passed. We then need to consider carefully how the EU law that is going to be imported into our own law will operate. Its processes and interpretation have always been different from our own domestic law. Much of it was not made by our Parliament, the very criticism at the heart of Brexit. So just to import it and then remove the existing EU law safeguards by which its operation can be challenged, if it is creating an injustice, needs remedying. Brexit bill not fit to be passed, say Tory rebels. There may be different ways in which this can be done, but the bottom line must be that it can be challenged if it does not meet the general principles under which it was made. As drafted, the bill prevents this from happening. Importation also means that equality laws that are now seen as being of fundamental importance will no longer enjoy the protection that EU membership gave them and will then be repealable by statutory instrument as a result of the bill. I am satisfied that the government has no such intention. But accepting amendments to prevent their alteration save by primary legislation would be both conciliatory and sensible. The bill also has a profound impact on the devolution settlements. This is in part inevitable, as powers to make regulations in areas such as agriculture, fisheries and the environment may have been devolved but were in practice done from Brussels. If the United Kingdom is to operate as a coherent unit, some of these powers will need to be coordinated from Westminster. But the bill is stark on these issues, and its critics are entitled to point out how it offends the Sewell Convention that Parliament should not normally legislate on devolved matters. As a unionist, I think the government would do well to look carefully at ideas put forward to soften this. The SNP will doubtless never be satisfied, but we need to take public opinion in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland with us on this. Some in favour of Brexit are so fixated on leaving the EU, they keep arguing that any attempt to change it is some form of sabotage. It is not. Dominic, Grieve. Some want to use the bill to keep us in the single market or otherwise influence the form Brexit takes. But I doubt this is possible or desirable, as this legislation is about process, not outcome. But conversely, it makes it all the more important that Parliament does not allow the bill to be used to fetter outcome. The bill seeks to give the government a blank check to tailor our laws to whatever form of Brexit it decides and manages to achieve. It makes it vital, therefore, that these powers can be used only to implement a Brexit that Parliament approves. Any agreement must, and will, in practice have to be subject to more primary legislation to do that, and the powers in the bill should not be usable without that safeguard. If the government responds positively to the debate in committee, then the legislation can be made fit for purpose. Some in favour of Brexit are so fixated on leaving the EU, they keep arguing that any attempt to change it is some form of sabotage. It is not. The problem is of their making in embarking on a revolutionary policy without appreciating the constitutional and legal consequences, and then complaining when they inevitably arise. The more we follow proper constitutional process, the more the government's position will be strengthened. At present, its problems stem in part from the complete loss of legitimacy that follows on all revolutions, damaging it not only at home but also in its negotiations with our EU partners, whose anxieties at achieving a new and orderly relationship with us, in view of what we have done, are perfectly understandable. putting the withdrawal bill in order as an essential step to stability and achieving a reasonable outcome to Brexit. Dominic Grieve QC is MP for Beaconsfield and a former Attorney General.